Too big to just sit, she sat, and discovered the most dangerous truth. She arrived early that morning, the way she always did. The building was still quiet, lights half dim, the air smelling faintly of dust and old paper. She liked coming early because it gave her time to settle herself, time to breathe, time to remind herself that she belonged here, even if she sometimes felt like she didn't. She had worked hard to reach this place. Nothing had been handed to her easily. Every step came with effort, patience, and a quiet determination she rarely showed on her face. People often underestimated her because she didn't speak loudly or demand attention. She preferred to observe, to listen, to do her work well and go home. That morning felt ordinary. Too ordinary to warn her that something small would change everything. As more people arrived, the room slowly filled with noise. Chairs scraped across the floor. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else complained about the weather. It was the same routine she had grown used to. Familiar faces, familiar roles, familiar rules that no one ever questioned. She took her usual place, standing near the back while waiting for instructions. Her bag felt heavy on her shoulder, but she didn't mind. She was used to carrying weight, both real and unseen. Then it happened. One of the senior figures entered the room. His presence changed the air instantly. Conversations softened. People straightened their posture. Eyes followed him with quiet attention. He was someone everyone listened to, someone whose words carried authority without effort. She stepped slightly forward, thinking she was expected to move to a different position. It was a simple motion, natural and harmless. But before she could fully adjust, his voice cut through the room. Too big to just sit. The words were not shouted. They were not dramatic. They were said casually, almost carelessly, as if they meant nothing at all. Yet the room reacted. A few people laughed softly. Some avoided eye contact. Others pretended not to hear. Her body froze. For a brief moment she wondered if she had misunderstood. Maybe he was talking to someone else. Maybe it was a joke. But his eyes were on her, and there was no confusion in his expression. Her face grew warm. Her thoughts scattered. She felt every pair of eyes in the room without anyone actually looking at her. The silence that followed felt heavier than noise. She could have said something. A dozen responses rushed to her mind. None of them made it to her lips. Slowly she sat down. The chair felt cold and unforgiving. Her movements felt awkward, as if her body no longer belonged to her. She stared at the floor, focusing on a small crack near her shoe, trying to steady her breathing. The meeting continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Instructions were given. Plans were discussed. People nodded, agreed, took notes. Life moved on. But for her, something had shifted. She listened carefully, but the words around her felt distant. Her mind replayed that moment again and again. The tone, the laughter, the way no one spoke up. What bothered her most wasn't the comment itself. It was how normal it seemed to everyone else. She looked around the room quietly. From her seated position, she noticed things she had never paid attention to before. Who stood and who sat. Who spoke freely and who remained silent. Who made decisions and who followed them without question. She realized she was not alone. Others like her sat quietly, eyes lowered, hands folded. They rarely moved unless told to, rarely questioned instructions, rarely drew attention. It was as if sitting was not just about position but about permission. The thought unsettled her. When the meeting ended, people stood quickly, eager to leave or move on to the next task. She remained seated for a few extra seconds, pretending to adjust her bag. She didn't want to be seen. She didn't want to risk another comment. As she finally stood, someone brushed past her and whispered, "Don't take it personally." She forced a small smile but said nothing. On her way out, she noticed a woman near the doorway. Older, experienced, eyes sharp despite the calm expression. The woman looked at her for a brief second, just long enough to communicate something without words. Understanding. That look stayed with her all day. As she went about her tasks, she felt more aware than ever before. Sounds felt louder. Silences felt deeper. Every instruction seemed layered with meaning. She began noticing how often people were told to wait, to sit, to stay where they were. It wasn't random. During a short break, she found herself sitting beside the same older woman from earlier. They didn't speak at first. The silence felt cautious, measured. Finally, the woman said softly, "First time." She hesitated, then nodded. The woman sighed quietly. "You learn to notice things after that." "Notice what?" she asked, keeping her voice low. The woman looked around before answering. "Who gets told to move, and who gets told to stay still." The words sent a chill through her. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave, she returned to the room to collect something she had forgotten. The space was empty now. Chairs stood neatly arranged. The room felt different without people in it, honest, almost exposed. She stood there for a moment, replaying the day in her mind. That single comment had stripped away something she didn't even realize she relied on, the belief that everything around her was fair, or at least harmless. She understood now that sitting was not always a choice. Sometimes it was an order wrapped in politeness. Sometimes it was a test to see who would accept it without question. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught something on the table near the front. A folder left behind. It wasn't labeled clearly, but it didn't look ordinary. It was thicker than usual, worn at the edges as if handled often but never openly. She paused. A voice in her head told her to ignore it, to walk away, to keep her head down just like she had been taught. But another voice, quieter yet stronger, urged her to look. She didn't open it, not yet. She simply picked it up, feeling its weight in her hands. It felt heavier than paper should, heavier with meaning. In that moment she understood something important. Sitting down had shown her where she stood, and what she might be standing against. She placed the folder back carefully and left the room, her heart beating faster than before. She didn't know what the truth was yet, but she knew it existed. And once you see that, there is no going back. The next day began quietly, but inside her, nothing felt calm. She woke up earlier than usual, her mind already busy. The words from the previous day replayed again and again. Not loudly, but steadily, like a slow knock she could not ignore. She moved through her morning routine on autopilot, washing her face, getting dressed, packing her bag. Everything felt familiar, yet slightly off, as if the world had shifted just a little to the side. She kept thinking about the folder, about the way people had laughed, about how quickly everyone had accepted what was said. When she reached the building, she paused outside for a moment. People walked past her, some greeting her politely, others too busy to notice. From the outside, everything looked normal. That almost made it worse. Inside, the day unfolded like any other. Tasks were assigned. Instructions were given. Voices spoke with confidence. She listened closely now more than before. She noticed how some instructions were firm and clear, while others were vague, almost dismissive. She noticed who received explanations and who was expected to obey without asking. She caught herself studying faces, small reactions, tight smiles, lowered eyes, quick nods. There was a pattern. She had never seen it before, or maybe she had but chose not to name it. Now it felt impossible to ignore. Certain people were always positioned in the same way. Always waiting, always adjusting, always sitting when others stood. During a brief pause in activity, she found herself standing near a group talking quietly. She didn't mean to listen, but their voices carried. "Better not bring it up," one person said. "It's not worth it," another replied. "You know how it ends." Their voices dropped lower when they noticed her nearby. They smiled politely, changed the topic, and moved away. The air they left behind felt heavy. She felt a small knot form in her chest. Later, while organizing papers, she noticed a list clipped to a board. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Names, times, assignments. But as she looked closer, something stood out. The same names appeared repeatedly under certain roles. The same people were rotated through less visible tasks. Others never were. She ran her finger down the list slowly. It wasn't about ability or experience or effort. It was about control. She felt uneasy, like she was seeing the outline of something hidden just beneath the surface. Not yet clear, but unmistakably there. During lunch, she sat alone by choice. She needed space to think. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, casual complaints. To anyone watching, it would look like a normal break. She stared at her food without really tasting it. Her mind returned to the older woman, the look they had shared, the quiet words. You learn to notice things after that. What had the woman noticed? How long had she known? As if called by thought alone, the woman appeared nearby, placing her tray down across from her. They exchanged small greetings, nothing that would draw attention. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Finally, the woman spoke softly. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. She looked up. How long have you known? The woman considered the question. Long enough to stop pretending it's accidental. That answer lingered between them. Why doesn't anyone say anything? She asked. The woman gave a faint, tired smile. Because silence feels safer until it is. That afternoon, she was assigned to work in a quieter area, away from the usual activity. It felt deliberate. Not a punishment exactly, but not a coincidence either. She worked carefully, focusing on her task, but her awareness stayed sharp. She noticed how often people checked their surroundings before speaking, how certain doors were always kept closed, how some files were handled with care and others with haste. At one point, she needed a document that wasn't where it should have been. She searched nearby shelves, then a cabinet she had never opened before. Inside were folders arranged neatly but without clear labels. Her hand hesitated. She reminded herself she was only looking for what she needed. As she shifted the folders, one slipped slightly, revealing a page inside. Just a glimpse, enough to catch her attention. Notes written in careful handwriting. Numbers, short comments in the margins. It didn't look routine. Her heart began to beat faster. She glanced around. No one was nearby. The room was quiet. She slid the folder back into place and closed the cabinet, her hands slightly unsteady. That was when she understood something important. This wasn't just about feelings or behavior. There was evidence. There were records. Things that explained why silence was encouraged so strongly. The rest of the day passed slowly. Every sound made her alert. Every interaction felt layered. She wondered if anyone could tell she was thinking differently now, if awareness showed on her face. When it was finally time to leave, she felt both relieved and unsettled. Outside, the air felt cooler, clearer. She took a deep breath, trying to release some of the tension she carried. On her way out, she crossed paths with someone she didn't recognize well. He paused, looked at her carefully, then said, "You're new, right?" "Yes," she replied. "Just a bit of advice," he said quietly. "Do what you're told. It makes things easier." He walked away before she could respond. She stood there for a moment, the words echoing in her mind. Easier for who? That evening, she couldn't relax. She replayed conversations, glances, moments that now made more sense. She thought about the people who always sat, about the lists, about the cabinet. She realized that the comment from the first day had not been careless. It had been a signal, a reminder of position. Sitting was not about space. It was about knowing your place. As night settled, she made a quiet decision. She would continue to do her work well. She would not act reckless or draw attention, but she would watch. She would remember. She would connect the pieces slowly, carefully. Because the truth, whatever it was, did not reveal itself all at once. It revealed itself to those who paid attention. And she was paying attention now. Days passed, but the feeling inside her did not fade. Instead, it grew sharper. She moved through each day with quiet care, doing everything she was asked, never more, never less. On the surface, she looked the same as before, calm, polite, focused. But inside, her thoughts were always working. She watched how people spoke when certain names were mentioned. She noticed how some conversation stopped the moment a person entered the room. She noticed how praise was given freely to some, while others worked just as hard and were barely acknowledged. The more she observed, the clearer the hidden structure became. It was not written anywhere openly. There were no signs on the walls or rules posted for everyone to see, yet everyone seemed to understand it, who could speak, who should wait, who must sit. One afternoon, she was asked to help with sorting records. It sounded like a simple task, nothing important. She agreed without hesitation. Tasks like these were often given to people who were not expected to ask questions. She worked quietly, flipping through pages, checking dates, placing files where they belonged. At first, everything looked ordinary, but slowly, small details began to stand out. Some records were incomplete. Others had notes written in different ink, added later. A few names appeared again and again, always connected to changes that were never explained. Her heart beat faster, but her face stayed calm. She reminded herself to breathe normally. As she continued, she found a folder that felt different from the rest. It was thicker, heavier. The edges were worn, as if it had been handled many times but rarely opened fully. She hesitated. No one was watching. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of papers moving and a distant clock ticking. She opened the folder carefully. Inside were reports, notes, and timelines. Everything was written clearly, but what they showed was troubling. Safety steps skipped, decisions rushed, problems marked as resolved without real explanation. Her stomach tightened. These were not small mistakes. They were patterns, and they affected real people. She understood now why questions were discouraged, why silence was rewarded, why some people were always told to sit and stay quiet. The truth was not just uncomfortable, it was risky. She closed the folder slowly and placed it back exactly where she found it. Her hands felt cold. She forced herself to continue working as if nothing had happened. But something inside her had changed again. This was no longer just about noticing behavior. This was about responsibility. That evening, she walked home slower than usual. The streets felt louder, brighter. Every sound made her alert. She felt as if she was carrying something fragile inside her, something that could break if handled the wrong way. At home, she sat quietly thinking. She thought about the older woman, about the warning looks, about the advice to do what you're told. She understood why people chose silence. Speaking up meant risk, and risk meant consequences no one talked about openly. The next day, she noticed small changes around her. Conversations ended when she approached. Tasks were reassigned without explanation. It was subtle but real. Someone had sensed a shift. She wondered if it showed in her eyes, if awareness had made her visible in a way she hadn't been before. During a short break, she crossed paths with the older woman again. They exchanged a look. No words were needed. Later, the woman found her near a quiet corner. "You saw something," the woman said softly. It was not a question. She hesitated, then nodded once. The woman closed her eyes briefly as if steadying herself. "That's how it starts." "What should I do?" she asked. The woman looked at her carefully. "Nothing and everything. You keep your head down, but you don't forget." That advice stayed with her. Over the next few days, she began noticing more people like the older woman, quiet observers, careful listeners. People who spoke little but saw much. They never gathered openly, they never named what they knew, but there were small signs, a shared glance, a pause before answering, a warning disguised as casual advice. One afternoon, as she was finishing her work, a message was left on her desk. No name, just a short line written neatly. "Be careful what you carry." Her heart raced. She looked around, but no one was watching her openly. Everyone seemed busy, focused on their own tasks. Yet she felt exposed, as if a light had been turned on above her head. Someone knew she knew. That realization stayed with her all day. She spoke less, moved slower, listened more. She understood now that the danger was not only in the truth itself, but in being seen as someone who might act on it. That night, sleep came slowly. Her thoughts refused to settle. She imagined different outcomes, staying silent, speaking up, walking away. Each choice carried its own cost. She thought about why she had come here in the first place, to work honestly, to contribute, to build something meaningful. She had not come to be controlled by fear. The next morning she made a quiet promise to herself. She would not rush. She would not confront anyone directly, but she would protect what she had seen. Truth did not always need loud voices. Sometimes it needed patience. As days passed, the pressure increased. Instructions became more rigid. Mistakes were pointed out quickly. Praise disappeared entirely. It felt like a test. She passed it by remaining calm. One afternoon she was called into a small office. The door closed behind her with a soft click. A familiar voice spoke, polite, controlled. "You're adjusting well," the person said. "Just remember your role," she nodded. The message was clear: sit, stay, don't reach further. As she left the office, her legs felt heavy, but her resolve felt stronger. Fear was meant to keep people still. She could feel it working on her. But fear also revealed how much there was to lose, and that meant the truth mattered. She returned to her place quietly and sat down when told. To anyone watching, she looked compliant, unremarkable, safe. But inside, she was no longer sitting in the same way. She was waiting. Waiting for the right moment. The morning began like any other, but she felt a quiet tension that would not leave her. She walked into the building, holding her bag tightly, her eyes scanning the room as she moved. Every small detail seemed to matter more than before. Every expression, every step, every glance. She noticed the people who always stayed in the background, who spoke only when necessary, who carried out instructions without question. Their faces were calm, polite, obedient, but there was a tension behind their eyes, a quiet alertness that only those who watched closely could see. She realized she was no longer alone in noticing. There were others like her, quietly aware, carefully observing the currents that ran beneath the surface. During the morning meeting, the usual instructions were given. Tasks were assigned. Deadlines were repeated. People nodded, made notes, and moved on. To anyone watching, it looked like a normal, ordinary day. But she was no longer an ordinary observer. Her mind was active, analyzing, connecting, remembering. She remembered the folder she had seen days ago, the notes she had glimpsed, and the pattern she had discovered. It was not enough to simply notice anymore. She knew that knowledge could be dangerous if mishandled. The question now was how to act wisely without putting herself at risk. When a task came her way that required reviewing old records, she felt a mixture of anticipation and caution. This was exactly the type of work that could reveal more if she approached it carefully. She worked slowly, flipping through the papers, comparing notes, observing inconsistencies. Some mistakes were small, easy to overlook. Others were significant, with consequences that could affect real people's lives. The longer she worked, the more she realized the scale of what was hidden. Rules were ignored. Decisions were made without consulting those affected. Warnings were dismissed. And the silence that everyone maintained wasn't accidental. It was carefully enforced, a shield that protected those in power and kept others compliant. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. She looked up to see the older woman standing there, tray in hand. The woman gave her a faint smile and, without speaking, placed herself beside her. For a moment they worked in silence, side by side, each aware of the other's presence. Finally, the woman spoke softly. "You've noticed more than most," she said. She nodded slightly, careful not to reveal too much. "I think I understand now." The woman's eyes met hers, sharp and knowing. Understanding is the first step. Knowing what to do with that knowledge is the harder part. Her mind raced. She wanted to ask questions, to seek guidance. But she also knew that some things were not meant to be spoken aloud. Some truths were too dangerous for casual discussion. She nodded again, understanding without words. Over the next few days, she began to connect more pieces of the puzzle. Small behaviors, repeated phrases, the way certain files were handled, all pointed to a system built on careful control and enforced silence. She observed who held power, who complied without question, and who silently resisted. One afternoon, she found herself alone in the records room again. She took a deep breath and opened a folder she had been avoiding. Inside were detailed notes, schedules, and communications that revealed more than she had expected. Patterns of decision-making, hidden warnings, and carefully documented incidents painted a picture of a system designed to protect itself at the expense of those who were unaware or powerless. Her stomach tightened as she read. This was bigger than she had imagined. It was not just about small errors or mistakes. It was about control, protection of authority, and suppression of anyone who questioned the rules. As she closed the folder, her mind was filled with questions. How many people knew the full extent of this? How many had tried to act and failed? And most importantly, what could she do without putting herself in danger? Later that day, she met with another quiet observer she had noticed over the past week. They exchanged brief glances, each aware of the other's understanding. "I know you've seen things," the person said. "We can't speak openly, but we can document, carefully, slowly." She agreed. Together, they began to organize information discreetly, making notes and connections that could help reveal the truth if the time was right. Every step was cautious, every action measured. One misstep could undo everything. Days turned into weeks and their work progressed. The tension around her grew, but so did her confidence. She realized that courage didn't mean recklessness. It meant persistence, patience, and careful planning. She learned to watch without being noticed, to listen without being heard, to collect information without drawing attention. Yet the danger was never far away. One afternoon, she noticed subtle changes in how people interacted with her. Conversations ended abruptly. Smiles were forced. Instructions were given with a sharper tone. It was clear that someone had noticed her awareness. Her heart pounded, but she did not panic. She reminded herself of the importance of patience. Acting too soon could ruin everything they had worked for. Sometimes, the most courageous thing was to wait, to observe, and to prepare. At night, when the building was empty and quiet, she reviewed her notes. She thought about the people who had been affected, the mistakes that had been covered up, and the systems that had allowed it to continue. She thought about the older woman, and the advice to do nothing and everything at the same time. It was a delicate balance. She had to remain invisible to protect herself, yet vigilant enough to understand the truth. Every day, she reminded herself that knowledge alone was not power. It was only the first step. How she used it, carefully and wisely, would determine everything. One day, as she left the building, she noticed a small envelope on her desk. No name, no indication of who had left it. Inside were notes, careful observations, and a single line: "Someone is watching, be cautious." Her heart skipped a beat, but she felt a strange reassurance too. She was not alone. Others were quietly working, observing, preparing just as she was. She returned home that evening, exhausted but determined. Fear was still present, a quiet companion reminding her of the risks. But determination had replaced panic. She knew that understanding the system, observing the patterns, and carefully documenting the truth was the only way forward. That night, she sat quietly at her desk, reviewing the notes she and her colleagues had gathered. She realized that silence was not always cowardice. It could be strategy, patience, preparation, and sometimes it was the only way to survive while still working toward change. She thought about what the older woman had said: "You keep your head down. But you don't forget." Those words had become her guide. Every action she took, every observation she made was informed by that principle. Weeks passed. Small victories were achieved quietly, misplaced records returned, minor issues addressed, subtle corrections made without anyone noticing. It was slow progress, but it built confidence and momentum. She learned to trust her instincts, to recognize the signs of danger, to differentiate between people who were truly unaware and those who were quietly complicit. And she began to see the beginnings of a network, people who could act cautiously and deliberately when the time was right. One evening, as she prepared to leave, she paused by the window. The city outside was calm, lights flickering, people moving about their lives. She thought about the days she had spent observing, learning, documenting. Every step had brought her closer to understanding. She realized that courage was not about bold actions in public. It was about quiet vigilance, careful preparation, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. And she knew that the dangerous truth she had discovered was not just about rules broken or mistakes made. It was about control, about who decided who could speak and who had to stay silent, about the cost of knowing too much. As she turned to leave, she made a silent promise. She would continue to watch, continue to learn, and continue to prepare. She would protect herself and those who were quietly working alongside her. And when the right moment came, she would act, not recklessly but with purpose, precision, and courage. Because the truth was powerful, but only if it was used wisely. And she was ready to see it through, no matter how long it took. The morning air was crisp, carrying a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. After weeks of careful observation, cautious planning, and quiet documentation, she finally felt that something had shifted. The knowledge she had gathered, the patterns she had uncovered, and the warnings she had noticed were no longer just whispers in her mind. They were a path forward. She arrived at the building early, as always, but this time she felt steadier. Her steps were deliberate, her mind focused. Every glance, every sound, every small interaction could matter, and she was ready to observe with precision. She knew that one small misstep could undo everything she had worked toward, so she moved with caution, but also with determination. The day began quietly. People arrived, conversations flowed, and tasks were assigned. She listened carefully, noting subtle changes from previous days. Certain colleagues were more guarded, some looked surprised at instructions, and a few avoided eye contact entirely. These details were not random, they were signs. People had noticed her awareness, and perhaps even the work she had quietly undertaken. During the morning meeting, she remained seated as expected. Her posture was calm, almost unremarkable, yet she was more alert than anyone could guess. As instructions were given, she noticed inconsistencies she had not seen before. Minor errors were repeated, important details overlooked, and small manipulations continued, all part of the system she had come to understand. At a brief pause, the older woman approached her quietly. She nodded, a subtle acknowledgement that said more than words ever could. The woman's eyes carried approval, as if confirming that she had been careful, patient, and wise. After the meeting, she returned to her work area. She carefully retrieved the folder she had seen weeks ago and began reviewing her notes again. Every detail mattered now. The errors, the manipulations, the people who remained silent, they all pointed to a truth that had to be handled carefully. Her colleagues passed by, unaware of the attention she paid to each movement and glance. She could feel the tension growing subtly, like a weight in the air, but it did not shake her. She had learned patience, observation, and strategy. She knew that action would come in its own time. Later, she met quietly with a few others who had also been observing, documenting, and watching. They spoke softly, carefully choosing words that would not draw attention. Each person contributed pieces of the puzzle, building a picture that was larger than any one of them could see alone. Together, they realized the extent of what had been hidden and the importance of keeping their efforts cautious. The day continued, each moment a careful balance between routine and awareness. She moved as expected, followed instructions, and remained polite and calm. But inside, her mind was active, planning, connecting, and preparing for what had to come. The truth could not remain hidden forever, and when it emerged, it had to be revealed in a way that could not be ignored. As the afternoon approached, subtle changes occurred. Conversations ended abruptly near her. Files were quietly moved. Doors closed faster than usual. Someone was aware. Someone knew she was paying attention. She did not panic. She reminded herself that preparation was more powerful than fear. One hasty move could undo everything. She stayed calm, collected, and attentive. Her knowledge was her strength, but timing would be everything. When the workday ended, she carefully gathered her notes and left the building. Outside, the evening air felt refreshing, as if giving her the courage and clarity she needed. She walked slowly, reflecting on the days and weeks that had brought her here. Every observation, every moment of quiet vigilance had prepared her for the next step. At home, she reviewed her notes once more. Every piece of information mattered. The smallest detail could change how the truth was understood. She reminded herself that the goal was not confrontation for its own sake. It was clarity, accountability, and change. Days passed, and she continued her careful routine. She observed, documented, and prepared, slowly building a case that could withstand scrutiny. Her patience paid off. Small patterns began to emerge more clearly. Connections that were invisible before now stood out. People's reactions, the hidden instructions, and the carefully maintained silences revealed the scale of what had been hidden. Finally, the moment arrived. An issue came to light that could not be ignored, a situation that exposed inconsistencies clearly. She and her colleagues, working quietly together, documented everything thoroughly. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. Every note, every observation, every careful record now mattered. She presented the evidence carefully, calmly, without anger or exaggeration. The facts spoke for themselves. The patterns she had observed, the errors, the manipulations, all were visible now in a clear, undeniable way. At first, some were skeptical, but the thoroughness of the documentation left no room for doubt. Systems shifted. Questions were asked. Investigations began. People who had previously felt untouchable were now accountable. Throughout it all, she remained composed. Fear had been replaced with purpose. Patience had become strength. Observation had become action. In the days that followed, changes were gradual but meaningful. Policies were clarified. Oversight improved. Those who had been silenced before now had opportunities to speak. People began to recognize the importance of fairness and transparency. She reflected on everything she had learned. Sitting quietly, observing, noticing details, and documenting carefully had shown her the truth. Standing up at the right moment had allowed that truth to be heard. Courage, she realized, was not about reckless actions or loud declarations. It was about awareness, preparation, and knowing the right time to act. The older woman approached her one evening. "You did well," she said simply. No fanfare. No unnecessary words, just acknowledgement. She smiled quietly. "We all did," the woman nodded. "Sometimes change begins quietly with those who watch carefully and act wisely. You've learned that now." She looked out the window, thinking about the journey. From the moment she had been told to sit, to the days of careful observation, to the point where action became possible, it had been a path of awareness, patience, and courage. She understood now that truth was powerful, but only when it was handled with care. Fear could be transformed into vigilance. Silence could be a strategy, and courage could take many forms, some quiet, some bold, but always deliberate. As she prepared to leave for the evening, she felt a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. The danger had been real, the challenges significant, but through careful planning, patience, and courage, she had faced the most difficult truth. She knew life would continue to present challenges, and that vigilance would always be necessary. But she also knew that awareness, careful observation, and the courage to act at the right time could change the outcome of even the most difficult situations. And for the first time since that simple, seemingly careless comment, she felt fully in control of her own place in the world. She had seen the truth, she had understood it, and she had acted. Sitting had shown her the danger, standing had changed it. And she knew that she would carry the lessons of this journey with her always. If you want, I can combine all 5 parts into a single complete story in simple, flowing English, ready for YouTube narration or storytelling, keeping it fully engaging and around 8,000 words. Do you want me to do that?